Hi everyone, it's William. Merry Christmas. It's actually the 26th, but I didn't do one for the 25th for Christmas Day, which was awfully busy. So I will take the liberty of wishing you Merry Christmas now. So we're up to the 28th of February in the Grand Duke Dmitri diary series for 1921, and what's special about this entry is that it was Dmitri's last day in Copenhagen. He had decided to leave and made arrangements to leave. So in the previous diary entry, there'd been this big outing to Dragsholm Castle with multiple cars and people, and yeah, so that was kind of fun. I hope some of you had a look to see what the very impressive Dragsholm Castle looks like, and bear in mind that you can go there, that it's a hotel now. So this particular episode, like the last two, has had large numbers of people that I want to mention before we get started. Not surprisingly, since it's Dmitri's last day, that he's wanting to say goodbye to people. So today we have both Audrey Parr and her husband. I think his name was Raymond. The Marlings, of course. We have a fellow whom Dmitri calls Henderson, which he spells with an A, Handerson, and I've changed it because I think this absolutely must be Henderson, and for some reason Dmitri heard it as Henderson and spelled it that way. It wasn't a Danish man, it was an American, and this is a one-off that he's mentioned in the diaries, so, but, not without significance. So the next person, Prince Valdemar, and the elder, the prince who was the younger brother of the King of Denmark and the previous King of Denmark, and the Dowager Empress of Russia, and Queen Alexandra of Britain. So then we have Meta, the wife of Olga, and Olga as well, of course. And we have another Valdemar. We have Count Valdemar of Rosenborg, who was actually the son of Meta and Olga. And the star of this episode is absolutely the Dowager Empress Maria Fyodorovna. Finally, we have a meeting with her after Dmitri being unsuccessful at getting together with her. Then we have Countess Bernstorff, one of the aunts of Marie-Louise. We have Marie-Louise herself, and we have some unnamed party attendees, a little party that Dmitri goes to, and he doesn't tell us the name of a single person who was there, except for the Marlings, who were the hosts. A word about tense here. I've mentioned before, to my eternal frustration, the way Dmitri writes his diaries makes it difficult to know what tense to use: simple past, past perfect, any of the continuous tenses. So in this instance, he almost never wrote these on the day that they occurred, and he didn't write this one on the day that it occurred, but he makes it sound like he did, and I'm thoroughly confused, because this diary entry, the day ends with one of these parties that lasts till 5 in the morning. And I find it hard to believe that then at 5 in the morning he went up to his room and wrote this diary entry. But anyway, the tense changes, and I don't know what to do with it, and so I'm just going to go with the flow. So let's dive in. It's the 28th of February, 1921, a Monday, in Copenhagen, and Dmitri is staying at the English Mission. All right. I finally decided to leave tomorrow, so I finished these entries today with the intention of beginning immediately with the 1st of March. Apparently, Audrey Parr has also decided to leave tomorrow. Imagine what kind of gossip will circulate around Copenhagen thereafter. But her husband, whom they call Saint Innocence, doesn't think anything of it. That morning I sat with Lucia and then went for 5 minutes to have a cocktail with Henderson, an advisor at the American embassy. I lunched at Uncle Valdemar's. Meta and her son were there. He's a little boy of 6 and has the most terrible manners I have ever seen. Valdemar himself is terribly nice. I love him very much. Afterwards, he and I went to see Aunt Minnie. She really scared me, the poor thing. She's gotten terribly thin, changed, shrunk, and apparently is very distressed about her health. She was sitting in her bedroom in a deep armchair and has really aged terribly. She's always been terribly nice to me. She asked me lots of questions about my impressions of Copenhagen and was terribly pleased to hear that I had such a good time. From her place, I stopped by to see Olga, who was with the guard. He was on duty, but it wasn't onerous because he would be finished at 5 o'clock. At 5 o'clock, I went to the home of Countess Bernstorff, who had very kindly invited me to come and see Marie-Louise, and I sat with her a long time. I dined at home. There were lots of people. The dear Marlings had arranged a very nice goodbye party for me. It was great fun, and it only broke up around 5 o'clock a.m. All right, so this diary entry, does it have anything of historical significance? Well, certainly for the history of the Romanovs, for anybody who's looking at the Dowager Empress at that period in her life, it's interesting. But the main thing that stands out to me is Henderson at the U.S. Embassy. Dmitri calls him a Sovietnik, a counselor, and I'm sure that's not his official diplomatic designation, but I don't really know diplomatic titles, so I'm going to stick with that. So a counselor at the U.S. Embassy, and Dmitri stops by for 5 minutes, he says, so quickly, for a cocktail. Well, why on earth would he do that? This Henderson has not been mentioned in a single one of his diary entries since he arrived in Copenhagen, and so I'm really wondering about that. Was Dmitri at any point ever thinking about immigrating to the United States? There was a time when he and Maria were both so freaked out about the idea that revolution was going to sweep Europe that they had sort of made some alternative plans, that they were talking about going to South America. So was he still sort of making inquiries, or was this another part of the kind of whole intelligence scenario around him? And was it conscious? And was he providing any information to the Americans? Because it seems to have been the Americans more than anybody else who were interested in him. So I don't know. I wish I did. Maybe someday I'll find some secret documents. I need to do some digging maybe and use the Freedom of Information Act in the U.S. and see if there was any kind of a dossier on him. All right, so he has his cocktail with Hansen, and now there's this whole issue of Audrey Parr, who has made her travel arrangements with the idea in mind of accompanying Dmitri. I'm not sure Dmitri himself is that thrilled about it. He's worried about how it's going to stir things up. And Audrey seems a little bit like a person who likes to stir things up. And there's Mr. Parr to think of, and Dmitri says they call him Saint Innocence. He spells Saint S-A-I-N-T-E, and then innocence is in lowercase, so I don't think he means a particular saint. There was a Russian Saint Innocenti, Saint Innocence, but I don't think that's who he means. I think he's talking in a general sense that people talk about Mr. Parr as being, naive about what's going on around him with his wife. And Dmitri's, thinking, yes, there's going to be all this talk. There are going to be rumors, and he even uses a slightly stronger word than just rumors, sluhi, and uses a word that's closer to slander that's going to be going on in Denmark. And yeah, I don't think he's thrilled about it. Okay, so Prince Valdemar, you know, not in the major leagues of royalty himself, but boy, these connections of his siblings were, you know, so many of them were crowned heads. And I finally figured out the relationship with Dmitri. So when I mentioned that he was the brother of Queen Alexandra and Grand Duchess Maria Fyodorovna and the previous Danish king, I forgot to mention that he was also the brother of Dmitri's grandfather, who was born Wilhelm, but then became George I of Greece as a teenager. So Valdemar was then Dmitri's great uncle. So he calls him Uncle Valdemar. I don't think he knew him well, but he clearly likes him. And so his son is Olga. So Dmitri and Olga were cousins once removed, I guess. And Prince Valdemar, I gather, also had a connection with one of his Greek nephews, George, Prince George of Greece, but I guess who came to Denmark for a while, but he wasn't in Denmark while Dmitri was there, obviously. So Olga is on duty, so the ones who are there with Prince Valdemar are Meta, Olga's wife, and little Valdemar, Olga's son. And if you know, going all the way back to Dmitri's adolescent diaries, if you followed those videos, then you know that if there's one thing Dmitri couldn't stand, it was bad manners, especially in children. Even when he was a boy of 14, he just couldn't stand that. And he didn't like that that his cousins, Nicholas and Alexandra's children, were, in his estimation, really had bad manners and were rude and noisy and bad at the table. And apparently little Valdemar even topped that, because he says that little Valdemar had the worst manners that he'd ever seen. But this is a diary entry that's full of very and terribly and all of these words, and it almost made me laugh as I was reading it, how many times Dmitri uses ujasna, which means terribly, in this diary entry. And he uses it in both a positive and a negative sense. I mean, we can do that in English as well. Uncle Valdemar was terribly nice. Or this child has terrible manners, he's terribly ill-mannered. And so, yeah, he's just using it over and over in this diary entry. And usually he'll use other adverbs as well, like strashna, frightfully, or, you know, one of the more, or the other one that he uses all the time is udivitelna, surprisingly or amazingly, but this time it's all terribly. And okay, so the reason for going over and visiting Prince Valdemar was to also pay a visit to his sister, to his older sister, who just happened to be the Dowager Empress. Before we go on to that, I wanted to mention a couple of things. One, that here again, we had this sentence before with another male person. Was it Olga? That Dmitri said, I love him very much. And he says this about Uncle Valdemar. And he's willing to say this about friends or people who are very kind to him, like Prince Valdemar. But he is withholding that word love from Marie Louise. He's not saying, I love her very much. He's only saying, I like her. Okay, and little Valdemar would die in 1995, and I don't know what he would do, what his life would be like. But so let's see. Maria Fyodorovna is another person that Dmitri says she has always been so kind to me. She's always treated me so well. And I think that was true, that she was very kind to him and took an interest in him. And I think he genuinely did want to see her while he was in Denmark. It wasn't just a matter of, well, I need to pay my respects to a senior member of the family. So after 3 attempts to see her where he wasn't able to because she was still too sick, he finally gets to see her. Interestingly, he does not mention seeing either Ksenia or Sergei Dolgoruki. He doesn't have a farewell visit to them, apparently. Apparently they weren't there. At least he doesn't mention them. So, and it's, you know, it's kind of sweet that the Dowager Empress wants to know all about what his impressions are of Copenhagen because she's Danish. She was born a princess of Denmark, and she's obviously proud of her native land and of its capital city. Now we don't have any clue at all what he said upon parting to Marie-Louise. So if I include that scene in my novel, I'm going to have to wing it. You know, did they promise to write each other? Or, yeah, I don't know. Pointless to speculate at this point, I guess. And here he is up again until the wee hours. He's grateful to the Marlings for this party that they threw him, but, and he doesn't talk about how hard it was to be up till 5 a.m. We don't know what time his train leaves the next day. So in the long entry, I think we'll get a chance to see that, how difficult or not difficult it was for him to travel the next day, with Audrey, no less. So we will be jumping ahead now to the 15th of March, and we'll be all business in the next, so that's a long diary entry, and he's reverting to his usual habit where he talks about politics and current events first, and then when he's done with that, he talks about his personal life, but you won't want to miss the first part of that diary entry because he talks about one really monumental event, the Kronstadt uprising, which I think, personally, I think that's the single most exciting and interesting event that happened in Russia in this revolutionary period, although, of course, obviously it's 1921 already. But that is exciting, and it gets Dmitri excited. And we have another reference on Dmitri's part to Olga as being someone with particular information because he's involved in intelligence with the Danish army. And interestingly, I've been reading Olga's memoirs of his life as an officer in the French Foreign Legion. And so Dmitri doesn't come into that. But interestingly, Olga ultimately ended up being made an intelligence officer in the French Foreign Legion. So, yeah, we'll see what Olga has to say to Dmitri about what's going on in Russia and what Dmitri thinks about what's going on in Russia. And if this is the moment he's been waiting for, well, of course we know it isn't, but it's still interesting to see how he responds to that. So please do come back, and I will see you next time. Bye.